Thank you for this. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to share. Simone, thank you for the work that you do. So I am Bob Hamilton. I'm a pediatrician in Santa Monica, California. I've been in practice there for 36 years. I am here. I don't represent, I'm actually here on my own. I have no financial disclosures. I don't have stock in Gilead or any other, anything else. And I'm here as a private citizen, and I will tell you that I'm also here as an advocate for children. So I'm going to share with you briefly, and where's a watch? I can watch my time here. Somebody give me about 20 minutes. Somebody put their hands up if you would. So I'd like to talk to you briefly about COVID and children, and some of this is review. Those of you who are in the room certainly know this information. Those of you who are watching online, many of you know this information too. But basically, the points I want to make are, number one, kids are actually doing very, very well with this infection. It turns out that the number, I was here a few weeks ago, we were talking about a percentage of total children being, of all cases of COVID, kids represented about 1.7%. That was about a month or two ago. That number has now increased to about 8%. Of all COVID cases, about 8% of them are occurring in the 0 to 18 age category. Okay, so there's a bump there. Now, that actually is a big bump. It's about a 46% bump that really began in the first weeks of July. The reality is that we are testing more, and probably we're finding more children who have COVID because it was always there, but they were asymptomatic. And in fact, in my own practice in Santa Monica, we've had about 8 to 10 cases that we have found positive. Why do we check these kids? Well, majority of them, by the way, were asymptomatic. We checked them because either their mother or their father was positive. And when we checked them, lo and behold, they were positive too. You would never know it. They were feeling perfectly fine. They were doing very, very well. But now we're doing the checking. We're doing checking en masse. Those of us in California certainly know that we have lines out the door to check for coronavirus, and we're finding it. But the good news is that children are doing very well. People should know that the mortality rate for children, I think in the country we're up to about 36 children under the age of 14 who have died. That mortality rate represents about 1/5 of 1%, okay, which is a very, very low mortality rate. So that is a point which is encouraging. Number two I'd like to make, and that is that children are really not transferring this virus from themselves to adults, okay? If you look at right now, the Europeans have gone back to school. About 22 countries in Europe have re-enrolled their students in schools. And the truth be told, that there has not been a big bump in coronavirus after that re-enrollment. They began this in the Denmark schools went back mid-April. The other schools in Europe have gone back May, and they're doing quite fine. They did do some changes. They did some distancing. They cut down the size of the school classrooms, and they were also careful about the staff. Staff, of course, are usually older, and they have made those adjustments, but they're doing very, very well. There was a study that came out of Korea a couple days ago. The New York Times has picked up on it. LA Times has picked up on it. They're kind of making the case that children are, in fact, potential spreaders. When you look at that study, they looked at about 5,900 cases, what we call index cases, and they then traced about 59,000 household contacts of these 5,700 index cases, and found that children over 10 years of age do spread the infection to their parents, other people in the family. Under 10, they're about half as likely to pass on the infection to family members. Now, mind you, it's important that you realize this is in the home. And we're talking about Korea. I looked it up. The average size of an apartment, and most Koreans, I've been to Korea, Korean is a very dense population, and they live in apartments. Even in the country, they live in apartments. The average size of an apartment in Korea is about 1,100 square feet. That's the average. Okay, that means that there are many who are which are smaller, larger too. So you can understand that the potential of them having very intense contact with sick individual is quite high. So it doesn't come as a surprise necessarily that children over 10 in particular, and when they're over 10, some of these over 10 kids are that tall. They act like an adult, and in fact they are spreading it. But that is in the house, okay? When you think about schools, you're not in the house when you're in a school, right? It's a very different environment. So even though the New York Times is using that as information, maybe they shouldn't go back, and the LA Times is using that, the truth be told, is it really isn't happening. I want to reference an article which is going to be published next month in August in Pediatrics, which is the American Academy of Pediatrics kind of journal that we put out monthly. The title of the article is COVID-19 Transmission in Children. The child is not to blame. And this study looks at information from several countries, China, Switzerland, Australia, all around. It really doesn't show that there's any indication that children are in fact, the drivers of this infection. So that is a very important point in getting our kids back to school, because people are concerned about that. The other thing I want to make a comment about is the failure of online Zoom education. I think we all kind of know this, but when you think about education, when you think about schools, what is the purpose of a school? Well, the purpose of the school is to educate children, okay? And if you're doing that in a online environment, you're relying upon not teachers per se, but you're really relying upon parents who are trying to work from home possibly, or not at home because they got to go to work. And these kids are not being well monitored. And I will tell you that a study came out looking at a typical year versus what is coming, what is happening now. And they're predicting that children going back to school this year are going to have about 77% of their English abilities, okay, what they should have learned, about 70%, as opposed to a typical year. And in terms of math, the kids this year are going to be about 50. They got about 50% what they normally would get in a typical year. They're going to be going back to school with. So the kids are really, truly losing out on education. That is a big problem. And really, we are putting a burden on families that is not theirs to bear. Particularly families where they have special needs children. That puts a real burden on these families, because they do not have, frankly, they don't have the resources to do what needs to be done. So we all know the virtual education has really been a tremendous failure. Just a note from Wall Street Journal had an article a couple of months ago, said that they looked at a study that evaluated 477 schools that went online. They found that only 27% of the schools took attendance. In Philadelphia and Boston, only about 50 to 60% of the kids showed up daily on a typical day. Only 42% of these 477 schools required homework, which is bizarre. They're at home. They're doing they're online. They're supposed to be doing work. No, they're not. They didn't require any homework. Only 42% of them. In LA, mind you, fully 15,000 kids, when they went online, this was in mid-March, they went online, 15,000 high school kids, which is about a third of the population of the high school kids in Los Angeles, not one time logged in. Okay? They're not getting an education. By the way, the LA Unified School District, they also said, by the way, FYI students, we're going to give you the grade that you have to this point in the class. We're going to give it to you. And so that isn't, I don't know about you, but that isn't much of an incentive. If they told me that when I was a high school kid, I guarantee you I wouldn't be running to my computer every day to log in, right? Okay. The last couple points I want to make really have to do with the opposition, really every major organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the CDC, and you all know President Trump all the way down, they're saying we need to get our kids back in school. And everyone agrees. We all need to because they're not getting sick. They're actually tolerating it very well. Okay, why aren't we going to be going back to school? I'll tell you why we're not going to be going back to school. Because the unions, which really run the school systems across the country, are not going to allow it. And I do want to, Stephanie, if you're here, is Stephanie here? I want to pass out a document. So I'd like to have you all in the room. Stephanie, can we pass those out? Thank you so much. Why aren't we going to go back? We're not going to go back because they're concerned about the adults in the room. Okay, everyone agrees that kids are tolerating this infection unbelievably well. But when you really, the reason we're not going to go back is because people are concerned about parents. But I'm handing out this document because I think it's important that we kind of go through it kind of carefully and look at what they're saying. This is the white paper, I would call it, or whatever you want to call this, progress report. They call the title of this, as you can see, The Same Storm but Different Boats, the Safe and Equitable Conditions for Starting LAUSD. LAUSD is a Los Angeles Unified School District. This is being put out by UTLA. UTLA is United Teachers of Los Angeles. They are the teachers union in LA, okay? And for starting LAUSD in 2021. The document really is, if you read it, it's a very angry document. It is very divisive. It is highly political. And frankly, it really kind of exposes who they are. As I have said to other people, I've said UTLA has really, in a city of masks, UTLA has unmasked itself, because you really read this. If you look at paragraph 2, it says this: the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States underscores the deep equity and justice challenges arising from our profoundly racist, intensely unequal society. Okay, that's their foundation. So what they're kind of doing with this pandemic is they're fusing a lot of other things into their anger, I guess, or their demands, and this is important. If you look down on the fourth paragraph, it says the document outlines the equity lens that we must use to view both today's emergencies and tomorrow's recovery. First, we ask who is suffering the most and why. And they claim that they are deeply concerned about the kids, but let me tell you, I think they're more concerned about politics. Look at page number 3. It gives you a demographic breakdown there in the right corner. You see that the makeup of the LAUSD is a very highly minority makeup. We have 73% of the students in LAUSD are actually Latinos. African Americans represent 8.2%. Asians are 4.2%. The white students are actually only 10%. So that came as a little bit of a surprise to me. Turn over to page number 6, and you see the pyramid that they have there. And if you look at that pyramid, here's how they want to equitably and safely restart the schools. You see the foundation of that pyramid. Do you see what it says? Increase funding. And basically, I want you all to know that the bottom line to this whole thing is money, and you have to follow the money. And when you begin to do that, you really realize what this document is all about. It's all about money. And if you look at the very top of the pyramid, in very tiny letters, it says, if you can read it, in-person learning. How about that? So it's very clear where their foundation is. Their foundation is, we want more money. And I turn over with me to page number 9. Page 9, kind of the mid-paragraph there. These estimates, the bottom paragraph, sorry. Unfortunately, I'm quoting here the document, unfortunately, instead of flattening the curve, politicians and the billionaires they serve have instead flattened school budgets and our capacity to safely restart schools in California, okay? So they're blaming the billionaires and the politicians. in California, that they actually, it's a very weird thing because California is a completely democratic state. Just FYI, everything is controlled by the Democrats. So I'm not really sure what politicians they're referring to, and I'm not really sure what billionaires they're referring to as well, because a lot of our billionaires in California actually happen to be on the left, not on the right. Okay, so if you look at what they're asking for, and this is where the money comes in, and we'll read through this briefly, and then I'm going to give you some good news, okay? They look at on page 10, they have federal support, then state support, and then page 11, you see local support. It's worth reading through these because I think, I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay, so federal support, they want a federal bailout. They're pretty clear about it. Number one, they want a federal bailout. They've already gotten money through CARES and HEROES Act. They want more money, and that's where it all comes down to. Number two, they want to fully fund Title I. Title I is something that has been passed a long time ago. Apparently is not fully funded. They want to fully fund IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was passed in 1975. They're saying we need an update. We need to give more money for that because we don't have enough money for that. They want Medicare for all. That's a big jump. We're talking about the opening of schools, okay, and they're talking about Medicare for all. I'm sorry, but I'm not totally sure how they relate. It goes further. They go down to the state support, the California Schools and Local Communities Funding Act. This is a proposition on the California ballot. Basically, they want to change the tax laws, the property tax laws in California. It goes under that wonderful name, California Schools and Local Communities Funding. It sounds good, but look out. They also want to have a wealth tax. They want to tax the California billionaires. There are only about 157 of them in California, but they're like keying in on these poor billionaires. I say poor billionaires, but they're keying in on them because they're great whipping boys. You kind of, of all people in the world to kind of beat up on, you want to beat up on the billionaires. And they also are going to include a millionaire tax, and so they're going to add a 1% surtax on incomes over $1 million a year. So if you make over $1 million a year, in California, by the way, it's almost impossible to live in California if you don't make at least $500,000. Those of you who live there know exactly what I'm talking about. My young families in my practice, it's almost impossible for them to buy homes because the housing costs are so high. So two incomes there, they barely scratch it out. Okay, local support, here's what they want to do locally. You ready? Page 11, they want to defund the police. I'm not sure how that fits in with the education objectives, but they begin with that, number one. Number two, they want housing security. We're talking about homeless housing security, and we're also talking about people who can't afford to pay their monthly rent. They want to have support, housing security. They want money for that. They want paid sick leave, more paid sick leave. They want a charter moratorium. This is important to comment on. There are a series of charter schools in Los Angeles. These are things like KIPP, which is KIPP is a group of charter schools, which means knowledge is power. I'm intimately aware of that particular charter school group because my son-in-law happens to be the CFO of that in Los Angeles. So they want to put a moratorium on charter schools, which simply means we close them all. And they say that the charter schools are diverting money from the pot. They are kind of correct in that regard, but I will tell you that the charter schools in LA are the ones that are teaching the kids. They really are pulling these kids out of mediocrity into a very high level of education. Finally, they want financial support for undocumented students and families. We have a lot of undocumented individuals in California, and they want to basically help them. And I understand their impetus for that, but this is more money, okay? And they also want to get rid of ICE, which is the immigration group who are trying to track down illegal immigrants in California. So in conclusion, what they write, normal wasn't working for us before, we can't go back. So what the people of California, people of LA don't know is this, is they don't know that basically our unions are de facto on strike. They're not going to say we're on strike, but they're really going to be holding the feet of of all of us, the families, the parents, to the fire, because they really don't want to go back, because they have an amazing opportunity to really demand and get more money from not only the federal government, but local governments, although the local governments do not have money. So the only people out there who can really print money is the federal government. So they're looking at the federal government to really to help them. Finally, I want to say, so that's why the kids are not going to go back, you guys. It has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with how much kids, transfer the virus. There, by the way, in the schools, there are ways of mitigating potential infection. The whole idea of hand washing, distancing, staggering schedules. There are literally scores of ideas, which are great ideas. We don't want to get this infection. I don't want to get it. You guys don't want to get infected. And we don't want our teachers getting infected as well. But we can do it safely, and I think we should do it. But the people who are going to hold us back, here they are. And I went through this in detail because I think that this is probably reflective of a lot of unions around the country. They talk to each other. We know they do. They get ideas from each other. So I don't think this is an outlier. I think this is probably more in line with what's going on out there. Final thing I want to mention, good news, and that is that parents in LA are getting fed up. They're weary, they're tired, and the prospect of having their children sit in front of a computer all day and do the Zoom education, which didn't work. We knew that already. I talked to parents all day. I said, how did it work? Even kids who are going to very wonderful private schools, they shake their head and say, it didn't work too well. And we all know that, right? Okay, the parents are getting weary. They're getting broken down. They're disheartened. What they're doing is they're forming what are now being called mini-pod educational units. They're gathering together with like-minded families who have similar age children, and they're essentially putting together maybe 5-10 kids together in a mini school, basically, hiring a teacher together, pooling the costs of that, and they're essentially forming, and I will tell you, there are thousands of these being formed. This came out a week ago, and I was surprised. I literally heard about 10 different individuals, and some of these are pediatricians in our community who are saying, no, we want our children educated. We're not going to wait for the LA Unified School District. We're certainly not going to do the online thing. So what is happening is there is a backlash, quiet backlash, which is occurring definitely in Southern California. I'm sure if this happens in Northern California, it happened up there as well, where parents are taking their children's education back, if you will. And listen, I intend that they're going to get a good education. I really do. I think it's going to turn out to be really quite nice for a lot of these kids who do this. I will say one last thing, and that is that UTLA and the school teachers unions are terrified about this movement. In fact, there was a memo put out by one of our local junior highs saying, if you are thinking about doing a mini-pod, forming a mini-pod and an educational unit, whatever you want to call it, this is contributing to the injustice of the educational system. So they're trying to infuse this idea through fear and guilt, whatever you want to put on people. They're terrified by that prospect. But wouldn't it be ironic, you guys, if after all of this wrangling and everything these guys go through, the LA teachers come back to no kids? They're all gone. They're all being educated at home. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.
So, yes. So even as somebody who pays a lot of attention to these issues, I was very interested in what you had to say. There was a lot of things that you said that I had not been familiar with. First of all, I just want to make sure that our viewers can actually find this document. So will you just tell them exactly how to find this?
The way you go is you look at the LA Unified School District is UTLA, Los Angeles. The name of the document, if you punch it in, the same storm but different boats, the safe and equitable conditions for starting LAUSD in 2020, 2021. And I think if you Google that, you'll find it.
And just to summarize, just because we spend so much time talking about the politics of why kids are not going back to school, I just want to make sure our viewers really got the message. So from a medical perspective, from a health perspective, are we okay sending our kids back to school if the schools are there for them?
Okay, listen, all I can say is that Mark Woolhouse, he's a guy from Edinburgh, Scotland. He said the following, it's worth ending my little talk on this note. He said, basically, there has been not one documentation of a child spreading coronavirus to a teacher documented and verified in the entire world. Okay, so and by the way, he's a professor of infectious disease and epidemiology in Edinburgh, Scotland. Listen, I would, even if he's half wrong, maybe there's one. I think that's a pretty good, that's a statement that he's not making lightly. So I think we can kind of take that back to our communities and say, listen, we really do need to, in fact, get our kids back in school. Thank you.
And I think each age group should have a slogan for their own age group. So for me, correct me if I'm wrong, I think for kids and schools, it's all about don't worry, be happy. Would that be true?
Yeah, that's true. Especially if this mini pod thing, which I think is going to be a very interesting development. We'll see where that goes. Thank you.